Welcome back to Proxy Hammer, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about Howling Banshees. And this isn't a unit that has gotten much attention this edition, and I think after reading their rules thoroughly, I can honestly say that even though they've increased in points, and by themselves, they're not spectacular at killing Space Marines, with the right setup, they can actually be very deadly and, quite honestly, game-changing. So let's look at them. So a quick overview of the unit. When you're reading through Howling Banshees, everything seems pretty standard. They just seem to be good at killing infantry, right? So they have +1 strength and -4 AP attacks, which is pretty decent. They're at -1 to hit from basically all sources. So whether it be melee or shooting, enemies need to kind of hit at -1 ballistic skill. Their Banshee masks, their Howling Banshee masks, make it impossible for units to overwatch or use set to defend when Howling Banshees declare a charge against them. And that unit that's charged within engagement range fights last. So there's a little bit of a caveat to this that I'll talk about a little later that makes them useful even if they don't actually reach combat. But they can also advance and charge in the same turn. They get +1 to wound on charge, which is fantastic because it's a little better than +1 strength. This means that they're going to be just wounding on +1 no matter what. Even if they needed 6s to wound, they'd be wounding on 5s as they charge in, which is very good and makes them a little more versatile. And they come in at 18 points per model, which is pretty expensive, but kind of in line with the rest of the elite units in the codex. Okay, so I also told you guys that there was a little caveat to the cannot fire Overwatch or set to defend. So if you read the Howling Banshee Mass Special Rule, it says each time you select an enemy unit as a target of a charge made by the bearer's unit, until the end of the phase, that enemy unit cannot fire Overwatch or set to defend. It does not specify that that unit has to make a successful charge or be in engagement range. All it says is that you have to select a unit as the target of that charge. So what that means is that as long as your Howling Banshees are within at least 12 inches of an enemy unit, even if they're not going to make that charge, they can still select it as a target, and that unit can't use set to defend or overwatch. So that means another unit that you have in assault that's going to assault them that turn as well can rush in there, and that unit cannot fire Overwatch or set to defend. And here's the cool thing. It does not also specify that that unit cannot just shoot Overwatch at the Howling Banshees, cannot use set to defend against the Howling Banshees. It says they can't do it at all. So this essentially negates Overwatch and set to defend for an enemy unit, making it much easier for other assault units that you might have to go in there and actually be able to fight with no penalties or anything like that, or, without being shot up first. Like, for example, if you have a unit of Shining Spears, that's a high priority target. Your opponent might want to actually use a command point and overwatch that unit, depending on what that shooting unit is or what that unit can do, or set to defend and make it harder for your, guys to kill them. Well, Howling Banshees pretty much negate this, and this makes them an excellent support unit. Okay, so having said that, when you're looking at just the rules of the Howling Banshees, the base unit of Howling Banshees, on their own, they can deal some pretty good damage and disrupt enemy units in close combat, right? The Banshee Mask is a very powerful support tool. Now, while this is pretty good, it's not OP, and I would say that in a lot of cases, a lot of players are just not going to take this unit, and the reason why is because even though they can prevent Overwatch isn't something that's, super overpowered nowadays. And the reason what I mean by this is back in the day, units overwatched for free. Everything could overwatch. Now you have to actually pay command points to overwatch. So less players are willing to do it all the time. However, it's a great, tool in case there's a good shooting unit of theirs. But in general, it's not going to be used in everything. So, a lot of armies also, just to be honest with you, yeah, they could Overwatch, but they don't want to waste the command points on it. So it's not always going to help you. It is a great support tool for, and also, kind of eliminates set to defend, which is great, but that's utility. For that many points, for 18 points a model, you also have to be able to do damage. You have to be able to carry the unit's weight in points. So if I'm paying almost 20 points a model, I'm going to expect to get about 100 points worth of value out of that unit, and denying Overwatch for a couple turns a game is never going to give you that kind of value. It's just not. So what is it exactly that pushes Howling Banshees to be a premier unit to field in competitive play? And the answer actually might not shock you that much, but the key lies in the Exarch. So I talked about this a little bit in my Exarch powers video, but essentially the most deadly combination of an Exarch power and a weapon is this. You take the Howling Banshee Exarch, you give it mirror swords, and mirror swords are free, they don't cost any points, and you also give that Howling Banshee Exarch the Piercing Strikes Exarch power. So if you read Piercing Strikes, it adds 1 damage to the 1 to the damage characteristic of melee attacks made by the Exarch, which on paper might not seem that good. But if you look at Mirror Swords, that's giving that weapon 2 damage. You're getting the +1 strength, -3 AP. Here's the real great part about it, though. Mirror Swords basically gives you the sweep special roll. Each time an attack is made with this weapon, make 2 hit rolls instead of 1. So that means that you're essentially doubling your attacks. A Howling Banshee Exarch has 5 attacks base. 4 base, really, and then +1 for being an Exarch. So each attack is now 2 attacks. That's 10 attacks. You're getting 10 attacks, hitting on 3s, and most likely wounding on 3s or 4s, against a vast majority of targets out there. And if you get the charge, you're going to be wounding on 3s. Now, this isn't even including things like Doom and stuff like that. So what does this mean? Well, this means that a Howling Banshee Exarch can essentially get 10 attacks against enemy models. A Howling Banshee Exarch can charge into a unit of 5 Space Marines by yourself and kill them. So what that means is, with this kind of damage setup, a Howling Banshee Exarch can actually often deal more damage than the rest of the unit combined. So this is pretty insane, right? Because what this means is that one single model can deal more damage than the entire unit. So this is great for a number of reasons, but essentially it's like this. When you have a unit of Howling Banshees, let's say you have a unit of 5, or 6, something small, you're really not going to have to go too much farther than that, because the Exarch themselves is going to be doing most of the carrying. That means you can have more points for other units in your army. And this means that essentially the Howling Banshee squad of 5 can do more than enough damage to make up its points cost in a single turn. In fact, the Exarch herself can make up that 100 points in a matter of turns. If the Howling Banshees are participating in 2 combats, they will make up their points worth against a Space Marine squad. And to be honest with you, because they force the enemy unit to strike last after every single thing else, that means the Howling Banshees are going to be set up to be doing more damage turn after turn and not suffer much retaliation, especially since they have a -1 to hit already. So they're pretty good in that way. And if they're, benefiting from light cover, or they're by terrain, they'll benefit from it even more. They have a large threat range, and they do not lose value for losing regular Howling Banshees, because all of the real damage comes from the Exarch. So if you lose 1 or 2 Howling Banshees, it's not a big deal, because the Exarch is going to make up for it. So in conclusion, Howling Banshees are really great at two different things. The first thing they're great at is supporting other combat units by using their Howling Banshee mask to prevent overwatch and to prevent set to defend actions. The second thing they're great at is basically destroying heavy infantry that they come across. The Howling Banshee Exarch is an absolute whirlwind of pure death. 10 attacks, dealing 2 damage apiece, hitting on 3s, and wounding on usually 3s as well. And this isn't even to account any special roles that you might have in your army. Howling Banshees are absolutely phenomenal in close combat, and they don't even have to be at full strength to do it because the Exarch is the one doing all the heavy lifting. And what this means is that if you lose some Howling Banshees along the way, 1 or 2, which will happen, people will shoot at them with stuff, it's fine. Because even if you just have the Exarch left in the unit, that Exarch can still do a lot of work and actually kill entire units of 5 Space Marines by yourself. It's insane. The Exarch is an absolute terror. So the only real downside to Howling Banshees, and maybe this is why some competitive players don't really like to take Howling Banshees, but the only real big downside is that they're pretty vulnerable still, even with the -1 to hit, and they require a lot of assistance to get into close combat. So they either need a couple things. They need a stratagem, they need a webway gate, or they need an actual transport to be able to make it into combat successfully and not be shot beforehand. But if you have the ability and you have the, the planning to actually invest in the Howling Banshees and get them into combat, they will be an excellent unit for you. And even just putting them in a Falcon, putting a small unit in a Falcon, using the Cloud Strike ability to get in there, get within 9 inches, maybe buff them with Ghost Walk, or, use the Strands of Fate stratagem to boost their charge a little bit. And when they make it into combat, they are going to always trade up because they are just phenomenal for their cost. They're absolutely phenomenal. They'll destroy the unit. And, it does depend a little bit on what they hit, but they can destroy most smaller units of Space Marines, even as a smaller unit themselves, which is a big change over the last edition. And to be honest with you, Mirror Swords is an absolute monster now. An absolute monster weapon. There's no real reason to take the Executioner or even the Triskele. Both of those weapons are kind of not the greatest anyway. And let me tell you, Mirror Swords with Piercing Strikes, phenomenal combination. All right, that's it for today's video. I hope you guys learned something. It was a quicker one, but I just wanted to showcase Howling Banshees and what they can do really quick. More videos to come. I'll see you guys next time and hope you have a good weekend.